Hello and most welcome to 1959 of the H series. We will now continue with a very short one started in 1958. It's an article by the famed Eugen Fischer. Eugen Fischer! Wittgenstein's Non-Cognitivism. Explained and vindicated. Vindicated. Where's my wind?
Vindicated.
Vindicated. By Eugen Fischer. And I will continue where I left off. Last time we mentioned this with truth apt, that the Wittgensteinian take is not one of criticism, really, even if that word is in use. It is not about making explanations. I think that's something that is pertinent. It's not about explanations. Wittgenstein don't want to explain language, the world, or anything else. He just wants to describe. It might seem pretentious to say, these are not explanations or propositions, it's just descriptions. But once you start reading Wittgenstein, you understand better. Here he has a very technical definition of non-cognitivism. I don't know if it's that helpful. The label non-cognitivism has usually been reserved for positions like expressivism and so on. The present paper will show that the replacement of cognitive by other aims for philosophical work is reasonable. And one of those we heard, some of those we heard before, is use, criterion, stage setting, and so on. Instead of the idea that we just experience something and it could be either true or false. Truth apt gives rise to the Gettier problem, for instance, Gettier problem, where the either or situation makes for a paradox that I was thinking very hard for 1 year about, I think. I got it served to me in philosophy. It's interesting, but it doesn't seem to have a solution. But Wittgenstein would say that there is no absolute yes or no absolute no. And by that, it ceases to be problematic for one. I think I put it in the chat. I think he spelled this Gettier. That would be my guess for the spelling of it. Well, I'll get into the flesh of the text. I left off mid third paragraph on page 54. Reading was the last word. In this way, I will explain what urges to misunderstand are. Section 1. How they give rise to illusions. Section 2. And how these illusions generate the sort of problem that Wittgenstein is addressing. Section 3. This meta-philosophical explanation will vindicate the non-cognitive approach. It will provide a rationale for the therapeutic chief aim Wittgenstein explicitly adopts and actually pursues. And it will vindicate the methods Wittgenstein employs. Which we will find to conform to his non-theoretical precepts. Finally, we will see that Wittgenstein's approach is considerably more relevant than he himself thought. Arguably, the meta-philosophical account that vindicates it applies to many important and familiar philosophical problems. And many philosophers actually pursue the therapeutic aim it serves, with or without realizing. The results will prove largely right. The arguably most revolutionary and most neglected position voiced in the ongoing debate about Wittgenstein's philosophy as therapy. They will suggest that we advance beyond Wittgenstein by developing a scientifically informed meta-philosophical theory to guide a therapeutic philosophical practice. Practice. And above all, they will provide us with a potentially helpful approach to cope with one particular kind of philosophical problem. Certainly not all of philosophy, but an arguably important part. In a nutshell, proceeding from a novel account of nature and genesis of philosophical problems, and a case study which examines how a pioneer of philosophical therapy formulated and treated a particular problem to which that account applies. This paper shows where and why something worth calling a therapy is called for in philosophy. In philosophy. And explains one pertinent approach for putting it into practice. Into practice. Into practice. Open your eyes up.
Practice.
Practice. On the exegetical front, the paper thus develops an interpretation which provides an accurate and philosophically potentially fruitful alternative to the prevailing tendency to credit Wittgenstein with substantive philosophical claims and either ignore his methodological remarks or dismiss them as self-misunderstandings. The assumption that Wittgenstein advances such claims in spite of his remarks to the contrary is generally just taken for granted. Due to unquestioned preconceptions about the nature of both philosophy and therapy. As there thus simply is no argument to engage with. The interpretation to be developed is best defended against readings informed by that prevailing tendency. By refuting these preconceptions, and scrutinizing those sections of the investigation to be considered that have been taken to express substantive claims. For this reason, the paper will proceed from a rigorous and detailed analysis of the primary text, and only then deploy the results obtained to engage with the secondary literature in this way. Which has the further advantage of not cluttering an argument of general philosophical relevance with exegetical debate. of interest mainly to specialists. Let us now develop the metaphilosophical account that will vindicate Wittgenstein's approach in 3 steps. Section 1 will build up to the core concepts of urges to misunderstand the workings of our language. Our language, our language. Section 2 will explain how such urges engender certain illusions. Section 3, how such illusions give rise to pseudo problems. 1. Philosophical urges. One of the urges to misunderstand Wittgenstein struggles with at length is the inclination to posit conscious or inner events where there are none. Where there are none. When we do philosophy, we should like to hypothesize, for instance, feelings where there are none. Wittgenstein characterizes this inclination by means of a comparison that brings out the most striking feature of such philosophical propensities. Just as Germanisms creep into the speech of a German who speaks English well, although he does not first construct the German expression and then translate it into English, just as this makes him speak English as if he were translating unconsciously from the German. So we often think as if our thinking were founded on a thought schema, as if we were translating from a more primitive mode of thought into ours. Ours. That we think as if our thinking were founded on a thought schema means that we have a certain inferential habit. We systematically make non-trivial leaps of thought that tacitly presuppose assumptions, instancing always the same schema. The comparison brings out that these leaps and the habit of making them are autonomous. 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 Leaps of thought presupposing given assumptions are autonomous if and only if the thinker makes them irrespective of whether or not he wants to rely on those assumptions. A thinker's habit of making leaps of thought which presuppose given assumptions is autonomous if and only these leaps of thought are autonomous, automatic. We make those leaps inadvertently, whether or not we want to make them, namely irrespective of whether or not we want to rely on the assumptions they presuppose. Typically, we are not aware of relying on the assumption presupposed, which may even be assumptions we explicitly reject. In leaping to a conclusion, we think as if we were inferring it unconsciously from an assumption that remains tacit and may creep in against our will, just as the German constructions creep in, even though the speakers know them to be out of place. As we shall presently see, the autonomous habits Wittgenstein examines are also, in this subject relative sense, a-rational, though not necessarily irrational. A-rational, not necessarily irrational. Irrational. Leaps of thought presupposing given assumptions are irrational if and only if their conclusions strike the thinker as compelling, regardless of what warrant he has for them. A thinker's habit of making leaps of thought of a certain kind is irrational if and only if these leaps of thought are indeed. In the grip of an inferential habit, an inferential habit, a thinker may leap from various different assumptions to wild conclusions for some, many, or all, of which he lacks all warrant, or to which he cannot even give reasonable determining meaning. But in that grip, they may strike him as compelling for all that. Indeed, they may strike him as so compelling that he explicitly endorses them prior to any argument. Finally, the habits at issue are context sensitive. We make the characteristic leaps not always, but often, versus when prompted by suggestive formulations or examples, while engaging abstract reflection, not guided by practical or specific goals. 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 Though certainly not identical with the three highlighted features of presuppositions, conclusions leap to, and leaps of thought, respectively, are similar to salient traits of the urges, say, for food or sex. Sex! Sex! Such exemplary urges are context sensitive, as they lie dormant for certain periods and assert themselves in particular situations, frequently triggered by certain cues. Cues. They are autonomous in that they make themselves felt and influence our behavior whether or not we want them to. And they are irrational in the sense that we feel the urge to act and may succumb to it, whether or not the action is right by our lights. In view of these similarities, it is quite fitting to define inferential habits, which are context sensitive, autonomous, and irrational, are inferential urges. Inferential urges, indeed. Let's now consider Wittgenstein's analysis of the urge to hypostasize. For instance, feelings where there are none, which brings out the three pertinent features. Then we will see why this urge is one to misunderstand. To misunderstand. The philosophical urge to posit conscious or inner events where there are none materializes, for instance, in leaps to unwarranted conclusions from sentences containing verbs or expressions like reading, copying, writing from dictation, playing from a score. The at first sight motley crew that Wittgenstein idiosyncratically lumps together under the label of reading. For all these activities, there are characteristic forms of behavior that may, however, be displayed without actually performing the activity. Thus, a pupil may carefully follow the text line by line with eyes and finger, while merely pretending to read out a text that he has previously learned by rote. Actual and merely apparent reading may involve exactly the same external behavior in the given situation. In abstract reflection, many people therefore find it intuitively compelling to conclude that the two must involve different inner processes and unquestionably go along with leaps of thought that presupposes instances of schema one. If and only if someone actually lies an inner conscious or unconscious process P goes on that makes the difference between actual and merely apparent viewing or being. Wittgenstein points out that this inclination is context sensitive. We make these leaps when considering particular examples with an abstract philosophical question in mind. In mind. Thus, it is not when considering an adult reader, but when thinking of a beginner who makes a conscious effort as he reads the words by laboriously spelling them out, that we shall be inclined to leap from this straightforward description to the conclusion that the subject's reading essentially involves conscious acts. Conscious acts. When asking ourselves what reading consists in, we then further leap from this specific to the general conclusion that reading is a special conscious activity of mind, or put in semantic guise, that the one real criterion for anybody's reading is the conscious act of reading. This happens in abstract reflection. When confronted with special cases, we are unwilling to treat any conscious event either as necessary or as sufficient condition of reading. 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 Second, the inclination asserts itself even when we have no warrant whatsoever for the conclusions we leap to. As Wittgenstein swiftly brings out in the following sections, we have no warrant for the present conclusion in either guise. Moreover, the moment we accept this fact, we leap to a related conclusion. Suppose we admit that, as far as concerns uttering any one of the printed words, the same thing may take place in the consciousness of a pupil who is pretending to read, as in that of a practiced reader who is reading it. Then we infer that an unconscious inner process must make the relevant difference.
Conscious inner process must
Difference,
make
relevant
difference.
Relevant difference. Now, we should of course like to say what goes on in the practice reader and in a beginner who is pretending to read when they utter the word cannot be the same. And if there is no difference in what they happen to be conscious of, there must be one in the unconscious workings of their minds, or in the brain, or in the brain. In the brain. Brain. We should like to jump to this conclusion, even though we really do not know anything at all about such unconscious mechanisms. The moment we appreciate this, we may then revert to the previous conclusion, that is, in abstract reflection, seizing on certain examples, we may shuffle between different unwarranted conclusions, to which we leap in line with schema 1. Schema 1. The inclination to make such leaps of thought is context sensitive and irrational. In the next section, we shall consider the part of Wittgenstein's analysis that reveals them to be autonomous as well. According to Wittgenstein's analysis, this inclination is what we call an inferential urge. Let's call it the mentalist urge. The mentalist urge. The mentalist urge. First, we shall see that when making these leaps, we read the conclusion into the observation or assumption we started out from to a greater or lesser degree. We spontaneously interpret the latter as either strongly suggesting or even amounting to the former. At any rate, in the latter case, we can be said to misunderstand the starting assumption. Second, the conclusions to which we leap may be or entail wrong claims about the workings of our language. As when we conclude that we must seize on a conscious act as a criterion for reading. In this case, we can be said to misunderstand the workings of our language. As we shall see, Wittgenstein examines also various other non-linguistic conclusions to which the same urge has us leap. Assuming that he examined here what he called an urge to misunderstand the workings of our language, I propose this definition. A, for short, urge to misunderstand is an inferential urge to leap to conclusions that include or entail false claims about the workings of our language, criteria, rules, etc. The various assumptions presupposed in such leaps may themselves be the conclusions of other leaps of thought that Wittgenstein does not systematically analyze. Analyze.
Analyze.
Analyze, analyze. It was such a tinted long away, but there's a shadow hanging after me. Thus, we may mindlessly infer that some sort of inner process has to make the difference between real and merely apparent being from the trivial observation that the two may involve exactly the same external behavior in the situation of being. Such inferences presuppose instances of schema P, real and apparent being have to be distinguished by reference to something that happens in the given or present situation of being, whatever being may be. If nothing external, then an internal process. Our actual linguistic practice is at odds with this presupposition, where the being in question is the exercise of a general ability. We may draw that distinction by reference to behavior in further actual or possible situations. We consider, for instance, whether the pupil who might be pretending to read is able to read another text of comparable difficulty, or to recite the given text without consulting it. Thus, the presentist urge to leap to conclusions in line with schema P is an urge to misunderstand the workings of our language in a different sense than the mentalist urge. Here, already the assumptions presupposed in the leaps of thought, rather than merely some conclusions leap to, are false assumptions about the workings of our language. The conclusions of these leaps may then be presupposed in others. One misunderstanding may thus give rise to a series of others. Others. I think that others. I think that's a perfect way to stop. Although others is a quite common word.
Others.
Give rise to a series of others. Series of others. I think that's more individualistic.
Series of others.
Others.
Page 58.
1959. Others. As a whole heap of others. What can you say when there are so many others? What can you do? I think the first schema we are familiar with pretty well. But let me first make a couple of quotes here to leave us going. Go to page 55 if you can, Kalle, would be very kind. Go to the penultimate paragraph at the very end. So what we do, inferential habit, this is what Fischer calls it. And there's nothing fishy about that. It's an established habit, and we make non-trivial leaps of thought that tacitly presuppose assumptions, instancing always the same schema. And then we get into schema 1 below. The comparison brings out that these leaps and the habit of making them are autonomous. They happen by themselves. And schema 1 is one schema we are familiar with. And these are irrational. We haven't thought about these things. Not necessarily irrational. I would say it's even if frequently they are rational. Frequently they are rational. But it's a very good parallel here. If you are fluent in English, but you come from a German background, unconsciously some expressions would sweep in. You would translate too close to German for being a very fluent and nice English. Although it won't be incorrect, the meaning might be still understood, or most possibly still understood, but it's still a sort of Germanism. I don't mean that you reverse the word order or anything drastic, but just Germanisms. Swedish, you can say to somebody, it can be, det får vara. Something that you can actually say in Minnesota. I think it mostly can be understood. But most definitely it's still unconscious. And I think even more important, it's very hard to get conscious of these things in comparison to a proper speech thought from German. Pronounce a consonant wrong or use the wrong expression completely, which is more obvious. These things might not even be obvious to the speaker of English. Fluent one. We go down to the one, or this is difficult. Bit down there. First paragraph, this, in the grip of an inferential habit, the one there, stop there, thanks, perfect. In the grip of an inferential habit, a thinker may leap from various assumptions to wild conclusions for some, many of, or all of which lacks all warrant, or to which he cannot even give reasonably determining meaning. We don't know why we do these things. They are irrational. They've never been thought of. There you have it. They've never been thought of. They're just there. And of course, within parentheses, Wittgenstein's job is to point them out. Not to explain why they're there, but to point them out. We go to the next paragraph that we just began here. And at the end we have, and they are irrational in the sense that we feel the urge to act and may succumb to it, whether or not the action is right by our lights. So we cannot even tell if they are correct, because we are not aware of them, and they probably go against our own acting. It's very close to what Alexander would call an unconscious habit, simply not aware of them. We can be made aware of them, but we are not aware of them. They are therefore called here urges, like urges to bite your fingernails or something like that. It's an urge to misunderstand. And the first schema one, I think we're so familiar with, so schema one we can take directly without any more explanations in form of the text. It's the next page. If someone actually verbs or vice, an inner conscious or unconscious process P goes on that makes the difference between actual and merely apparent being. Goes for all the verbs and a lot of other things. We can use seeing or reading. So to make a difference between one who's pretending and one who's not pretending, we need to infer that. You feel compelled, urged, we're habituated, we're addicted to thinking this way. We go to the penultimate paragraph here. In two respects, this urge is one to misunderstand. First, we should see that when making these leaps, we read the conclusion into the observation or assumption we started out from to a greater or lesser degree. We spontaneously interpret the latter as either strongly suggesting or even amounting to the former. I came up with a simile here, and that is, think of a dyslexic. He makes involuntary automated jumps in the spelling when he spells out words. I had a little bit of that habit. I passed the infinite particle in Swedish, tu, have a habit of not writing it out. I made a jump. I wouldn't call it dyslexia, but it was constantly missing. I'm not alone in this, but it's a jump. Definite jump. Unconscious. When I looked, they were simply not there. Could even think that I was writing them, but I were not. It's a sort of mal-working role playing I was doing, or the dyslectic. Let's get to schema P. Now it becomes different. Now we get into more complexities. Now it gets rather schema P. Real and apparent being have to be distinguished by reference to something that happens in the given or present situation of the reading. There needs to be something there in the present, in that situation, and also in the present of, for instance, now. It needs to be now somehow, or nowish. This is also called the presentist urge, something that we can point to, and we think this directly. It is not something we at some instant assumed. It's not an ideology. It is not nobody taught us this. Maybe we unconsciously imitated a parent or something. Doesn't have to be that either. Can just come from nowhere. So what Wittgenstein is doing is exposing the behavior, and you start thinking and you see, oh dear, it's irrational. Let's not do it anymore, or let good thinking enter into this. Let me think about it. Being is, I think V stands for verb. It's just something you do, anything. Seeing, reading, sitting, something like that. So what he points to are ingrained, autonomous, non-visual habits of thinking that happens rather quickly, I'd say too as well. They are not slow. Actually, they come so quick, you have no chance of avoiding them. The presentist urge is also a bit similar, but quite a lot similar to the logocentrism of the metaphysics of presence, I'd say. Kalle, still very complicated so far. We haven't gone into the juicy details where more explanation come, but you're more than welcome to give some comments.
Yes, I could actually compare this V, although it refers to word, to the victory sign, perhaps.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
It's actually doing a gesture. We have spoken much about gestures.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it's not in the process you do it.
Yeah, for a reason, with some intention, and yeah.
Let me show you something else here. So let me go to this on page 50. This was 55. Yes, this was 55. Yes, this example with German. So I give you my understanding of this passage. So let's say that you have a English German who uses these German idioms or German constructions in English. So here it's easy to fall into a trap to think that German is the original, so to say.
Oh yeah.
Since German is your first language,
yeah,
then that this person would have first thought in German and then translate in English.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. Very good. Fantastic. Yeah.
But we should not fall into the trap. He says, Wittgenstein says explicitly that it's not about this. It's not about translating unconsciously, or there could be some unconscious translation, or no, perhaps not. There is no unconscious translation. It comes after the fact, perhaps. You realize that, okay, so there is no original, so to say. German is not the original.
No,
instead, so where is the solution? We should see them as players in a play. So the German language and the English language are like two players there. So after he had put in a German construction in his English, you have, so to say, two players playing with each other.
Yeah.
Not one original against another.
No.
And
exactly, that's what it is about. And I can say for myself, if I can take an example, I learned Spanish as an adult age. And yeah, to a certain extent in the beginning, this is not a beginnings example that Wittgenstein gives. I did translation in my head to a certain extent, but that never worked out. That were not a good way of learning the language. Then I relaxed and I just iterated, and there was no translation anymore. And now when I speak Spanish, there's no Swedish thinking at all going on at all. That would take time. It would be it wouldn't be as smooth. I just do it.
And when we see the word unconsciously, it's not that Wittgenstein believes in this unconscious thing. This is something from Freud. But
it's very good.
It's misleading.
Not that unconscious.
It's misleading.
We are simply not aware of it, whereas in Freud, the unconscious is a thing.
Perhaps you should see this as two games, as two, like the Monty Python football game.
Yeah, I like that.
Like Germans against, not Germans against Greeks, but the Germans against English.
Yeah.
And but the analogy is not complete because we are now speaking about. No, it could work. Let's say that this play is actually in England, and so the Germans have arrived, the German players who arrived to UK to play, they have to adapt themselves to a hostile public, perhaps.
No.
Yes, they have to sort of perhaps in some way.
Yeah.
If the Germans come to the British soil to play in a soccer game, I don't know. But they still two different teams playing, and so it's not about, and it's something unconscious. It's something unconscious. I think is misleading. You will take in context the context. You will take in consideration the context of the.
Yes, you will.
Okay, let me now leave this example. Go to next page. This are rational. It's something, but I think I will wait with that. I'm not so certain that I understood completely Fischer's conclusions. Like if somebody actually does something, an inner process P goes on that makes the difference between actual and mere apparent being.
Oh yeah. I think that will be understood further because the text is just in the beginning of the text. But I can give a hint there. It's close schema 1 in contrast to schema P. Schema 1 we gone through before, but with quite different words. And it's the idea that we assume some sort of inner process to make a difference between somebody who doesn't know how to read, a beginner, and one who can read, for instance. That's one example.
Oh, I would, to return to the Churchill victory sign, I don't know if you can explain this schema with that.
Well, I can take myself as an example, or a friend of mine called Michael. He went to England and I think I did the sign first for some reason. I think we won. We're playing football. And then later on in the game, we won again, a goal. And he did the sign again. But do you know what he did? He put it backwards. If you put it backwards in British, in the British Isles, it's a terrible insult. And he got hit on the head directly. It's even worse than the bird in England. So he didn't perform it correctly. And there somebody will think that, oh, his inner was different. He wanted to insult us, whereas Hans did it correctly, and he wants to be happy with us.
Yes, everything is, so to say, I don't know, in the doing.
Yeah, it's connected to the doing. You're not far off there. Action, doing, criterion. Fischer will not use those expressions. So he's a bit more Spartan, but you will get clues as we continue to read. But you're not far off. Action, yeah, definitely action, different actions.
Well, let's leave it there for today, I propose.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for your patience, Kalle, here with the beginner's text here. That's quite dense. Thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, day, or afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye, and thank you very much. We end with a V sign.